Today, what I'm going to do is to look particularly at the stream of mathematical knowledge that flows from the ancient world to the present, and to look at how that drives the evolution of culture, and how every discipline of knowledge is affected by the developments in mathematics. Mathematics is the language of science. The natural laws of the physical universe exist from the grossest to the subtlest levels of construction. And it's mathematics in combination with scientific inquiry that has enabled us, in the 2,500 years since the time of Pythagoras and the ancient Greeks, to travel from the grossest level, the surface level of perception, to the subtlest subatomic level of structure of the universe. Each scientific discovery, written in the language of mathematics, clearing away layer after layer, moving to the subtlest subatomic level, to the time in the present, in the 21st century, where a group of physicists called the Princeton String Quartet now believes that they have found the subtlest level of matter, the superstrings of the universe. The question is, and the question I'll ask you at the end of this lecture, is, has the deep principle that superstring theorists have searched for to find the essence and the origin of the universe and human consciousness, has that question already been answered? And I'll offer you one angle on that, the answer to that question, from the standpoint of Vedanta. That every world philosophical tradition has its answer to that. Vedanta, the ancient Hindu tradition of the Vedas. I'll offer that and ask you the question, is this one possible answer? So when we look at the role of mathematics in the evolution of culture, we notice that there is a synchronicity of events. Synchronicity. What does that mean? That means that events tend to happen at the same time. Synchronicity of events between math, science, and art. Math, science, and music. Math, science, and architecture. It seems as though when an idea is presented in the social consciousness of any time period since the ancient world, Warta Cha, the Renaissance, modern world, whatever period of time we're in, when the top thinkers, the most powerful minds of that century, of that time, present an idea, mathematical ideas, scientific ideas, it causes a ripple throughout the social consciousness that we can see in art, in literature, in music, in philosophy, in religion. It's as though the social consciousness of each time is a complete system, interconnected system. An event in one, a perturbation in one area, causes a reaction in another area. We'll see this in art, music, and architecture. And as we said, math-based scientific ideas transform cultural history. Math-based scientific ideas drive industrial and technological revolutions. The natural rights, drawn from the natural law theory of the 18th century and before that, in the Middle Ages, becomes a basis for political revolutions. The French Revolution, the American Revolution. Drawing on the idea of natural law as a basis of God-given natural rights, the justification for the style of government that a society should have. And finally, as we said, the deep principle, face to face with the absolute. Once we clear away all of the levels of the construction of the universe and get down to the subtlest subatomic level, the superstrings, the four forces, what comes beyond that? The superstring theorists were talking about finding a deep principle. And as we said, we'll look at Vedanta and the deep principle in the modern world. Mathematics in the ancient world. We have to begin with Pythagoras. Pythagoras, who lived on the island of Samos off the west coast of Turkey. I'm planning on visiting there, also because Homer wrote part of the Iliad there. But Pythagoras had this to say: there is geometry in the humming of the strings. There is music in the spacing of the spheres. And basically, this quote is an expression of his belief that the entire cosmos resembles the the construction of a Greek lyre, 4 strings, the vibrational qualities of a string, are reflected in the construction of the cosmos, the proportional relationships between the orbits of the planets in the solar system around the sun. He believed that the entire universe was one system of vibrating matter that could be understood by understanding how a vibrating musical string works. And that in fact, the entire system of music that he proposed for Greek society is an outgrowth of that. Because they took their music very seriously. They felt that it was connected intimately to the morality and integrity of human consciousness, as well as the construction of the cosmos and the voice of God in human consciousness. So if you believe that, you take your music, the music you made on earth, very seriously. And the Greeks did. We look at the contributions of Pythagoras. We notice his interest in numerology, the influence of Pythagoras on the Platonic solids, the golden mean and rectangle in architecture at the basis of the structure of the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Athens. How many have seen the Parthenon in Athens? Almost everyone. But he also thought that Greek music and the cosmos were intimately related. And I'm going to play you an example in the Phrygian mode of a piece of music that is very similar to what the Greeks would have listened to for entertainment in ceremonial uses. In the Phrygian mode, carefully constructed to have just the right effect on human emotions and morality. This particular piece is called Parthenian. Music carefully selected that Pythagoras felt was in tune with the harmony of the spheres, the music of the spheres, in harmony with the cosmos, in harmony with the voice of God. Well, Pythagoras' concept, the harmony of the spheres, influenced later philosophers like Copernicus and Kepler and the Princeton String Quartet. The question was he right? Do the planets actually make sound? Are they like vibrating strings? If you could listen to them, would you hear something like a guitar or a Comanche playing? Is that what you'd hear? Well, in the late 1970s, the United States had a space program called the Voyager program. It launched a satellite out into the solar system to actually listen to the planets. And this is what they came up with. This is what the Voyager spacecraft picked up as it was passing the planet of Saturn. Apparently he was. That's coming straight from the recordings of the NASA, Space Association in the United States, the Voyager satellite. So, apparently, Pythagoras had the right idea. The planets actually do vibrate, they make sounds. There's a whole set of these, if you're interested in these, there's a whole set of recordings for the other planets that make a variety of different sounds that are harmonics of this sound. So that's for further research if that interests you. Again, Pythagoras' concept of music is based on the Greek kithara, the Greek lyre. You can see the strings of the lyre here, tuned to pitches that he felt were in the same proportion to each other as the celestial bodies vibrating in the physical universe. Here are some examples of the scales that Pythagoras developed. We just heard the Phrygian mode, the third one down. And if you look closely at Raphael's School of Athens in the Vatican archive, you look at the lower left-hand corner of the painting right here, what you see is Pythagoras' kithara, his lyre. So in the Renaissance period, Raphael created a painting with Plato and Aristotle at the center, right here, and someone playing Pythagoras' kithara down here. Evidence of the survival of Pythagoras' knowledge into the Renaissance period, as well as other Greek traditions that fueled the Italian Renaissance. The golden mean principle in architecture, the golden rectangle. Well, the first example we think of is the Parthenon in Athens. And basically, the golden mean principle is the principle of the total length of a line and its division at about the 2/3 point. That structural principle is powerful. And if you look at buildings that are constructed along those lines, they have a dynamism, almost as though they're about ready to take off. There's something about the visual dynamism of it that is different than a building built by any other means. The Parthenon is an example of that. Expanding the golden mean principle into the golden rectangle. And then look at the structure of the Parthenon, on either side, actually. Look at the structure of the Parthenon, the relationship between this part of the building and this part of the building. So the Greeks translated music into architecture. In fact, Johann von Goethe once said, architecture is crystallized music. The proportions of music, the same proportions that Pythagoras generated with the vibrating string, are the same proportions used to build the Parthenon. The Platonic solids, also structured according to the golden mean. And the significance of this is that Plato felt that these were the essential building blocks of the universe, that all matter could be distilled down into these shapes, these 5 shapes, the essential shapes. And then, of course, Kepler took these shapes and gave us a geometry of the universe in this particular diagram. Mathematics of the Middle Ages. Is the Greek presence still felt? Of course it is. Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, living up in Konya at the time in the 13th century, said that we should rise above the mental horizon, O brave soul, and listen to the call of music coming from above. if you look closely at his readings in the Masnavi and other texts, he talks about the heavenly origins of music, and music is the voice of God, and that the human race should be more attuned to music, and the music coming from above, than the noise that is created on this plane of existence. Another mathematician of the Middle Ages, Leonardo Fibonacci, created the Fibonacci series. Each number is the sum of the two preceding numbers. Origins in Greek, Roman, Indian, and Arabic math. And as we'll see as we go on in this presentation, the influence of Middle Eastern scholars on Western science is extraordinary. If you're interested in learning a little more about that, there's a text by John Freely entitled Light from the East, the study of the influence of Middle Eastern science on Western science. Fascinating. What has come, the knowledge that has come out of the Middle East to inform the West. The Fibonacci series, created by adding two numbers to get the next number. And the circular arcs created by the opposite quarters, the squares of sizes 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and 54. And the golden spiral, visible in a seashell and mirrored in the construction, the spiral construction of a galaxy. So these essential shapes generated by the golden mean principle appear to be the essential formulas for the construction of the universe from the subtlest level of its structure, the subtlest subatomic level of the structure, to the grossest level of structures in the galaxies, including the construction of the human body from the subatomic level, the atomic level, the molecular level, the cellular level, the level of the tissues, the level of the organs, organ systems, and finally, the construction of the whole body. The entire human body is constructed according to the divine principle of the golden mean. So see what we're building here. We're building a connection between the construction of human consciousness and physiology, music, architecture, literature, philosophy, religion, science, and mathematics. All of it is one synchronicity. One part influences another. It's all part of the same system. The 12th century awakening in its center at the Chartres Cathedral in central France, a symbol of the 12th century Enlightenment. How is it structured? The golden mean principle, because the Freemasons who built it were borrowing on Pythagorean ideas. I'd like to play you an example of the music that would have been heard at this time. People who built this cathedral, the musicians were in tune with this concept. It's an early form of music. The music that you're hearing is over 1,000 years old. And it would have been familiar to the people who built the Chartres Cathedral. The Chartres Cathedral, structured according to Pythagoras' golden mean. This section of the building, relative to this section of the building, and all of the intervening parts were cut to fit the proportions of the golden mean. And if we wanted proof that Pythagoras was still very much in the consciousness of the Middle Ages, all we have to do is look at the west entrance, just over the west entrance of the Chartres Cathedral, and who do we find? Pythagoras. Looking down at those entering the church, at that point 1,500 years distant from them, 2,500 years distant from us. But again, the influence of Middle Eastern scholarship on the West. Al-Farabi, a Turkish mathematician who wrote the great book of music and presented the mathematical formulas for the Turkish makam, influenced by Plato, Aristotle, and Pythagoras. So the music that you listen to in the Turkish makam tradition also has Pythagorean influences through Al-Farabi, who lived in Turkey, then Anatolia, of course, at a time around the Abbasid Islamic Golden Age in Baghdad. If we wanted an example of music constructed according to these principles, the Turkish makam and its link to Pythagoras, we need only go to the son of Mehmet II, Bayezid II, with his Tura, for this particular piece of music. Example of the Turkish makam and the influence of Pythagoras. The Turkish makams are related to the Arab makams, Byzantine echoes, Persian dastgahs, Uyghur makam, the Uzbek shash makam, Hindu ragas, modes in Western music, and the 20th century tone row from 12-tone composers Arnold Schoenberg and Anton Weber. So these musical traditions are connected. They're influenced by Pythagoras. They're an outgrowth of the Greek concept of music theory, with original additions by Al-Farabi and the construction of the Turkish makam to give each musical tradition its own distinctive identity. Mathematics in the Renaissance. We said divine proportions in the human form. I'm going to play an example of music driven by the golden mean to accompany Michelangelo's David, sculptural work from the early 16th century. And in it, you can see the golden mean construction. This is the same music that Michelangelo would have heard performed in his cathedrals in his time. Music by Giovanni Gabrieli and Tiffinal Brass Ensemble. proportion in the human form of the Renaissance period. We often think of the Renaissance as rebirth. The influence of Greco-Roman classical humanities was never absent. We've seen it in the Chartres Cathedral. We see it again in the Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci's The Vitruvian Man, to the music of Giovanni Palestrina's Pope Marcellus Mass. Also, a study in the Pythagorean golden mean principles. Proportion, proof in the minds of the Renaissance scholars and philosophers, proof in the mind of Pythagoras, that human beings are constructed according to a divine constructional principle. It is our essence. Let's move on in the Renaissance to Nicholas Copernicus and his heliocentric theory, based on Arabic mathematics and astronomy theories from Arabic, Iranian, and Turkish astronomers. Galileo Galilei's Starry Messenger of 1610 and Nicholas Copernicus's De Revolutionibus, 1543. All of these contributed to a greater understanding of the role of the sun as the center of the universe. Before this, particularly because of the influence of the geocentrism of Aristotle, people believed, and it was church doctrine, that the earth is the center of the solar system, geocentrism. Galileo and Copernicus challenged the church, and Galileo spent the later years of his life in exile because of it. Take a look at this particular clip that discusses a little more thoroughly.
Galileo was born into a world where each morning reaffirmed the common view that the sun moved around the earth. This belief was confirmed as the sun appeared to pass overhead each day. From ancient times, astronomers had tried to account for the observed motions of heavenly bodies by assuming that they were attached to transparent crystal spheres, rotating sphere within sphere. The Greek astronomer Ptolemy worked out the system in great detail to explain the motions of the sun, the moon, the stars, and the planets, all that could be seen with the naked eye. At the center of Ptolemy's intricate system sat the earth, solid and unmoving.
The Ptolemaic system was filled with ingenious geometrical devices. It made it possible for people to compute where the planets were to be, and this was useful, let us say, for astrology. It was useful if you just wanted to keep track of where things were in the sky. But it wasn't perfect.
60 years before the telescope, a Polish clergyman, Nicholas Copernicus, noticed that the calculations needed to predict the positions of the planets in the sky would be simplified if he assumed that the sun, rather than the earth, were at the center of the universe.
For decades after his book, most astronomers simply suspended judgment. The reason was that there was no observational evidence that the earth moved. In fact, it seemed almost silly that the earth moved.
In the Copernican system, The Earth was never still. It had two separate motions, revolving around the sun each year and spinning on its axis once each day.
The thing that Copernicus suggested just made him really the laughing stock of Europe, because he was saying here is the Earth is actually whizzing round at a huge speed, about 700 or 800 miles an hour. That's just going round on its axis, and in addition it's going around the sun at about 30 miles a second. I mean, they were saying, this is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, look at the ground, it's as solid as you can. Clearly the Earth is not moving. Nothing could be more obvious than the fact that the Earth is moving. If it was moving, everything would be flying off it. I mean, church steeples would fall down, birds couldn't keep up with it, clouds would go disappearing over the western horizon and things like this.
Galileo had read Copernicus and already suspected that the Copernican system was correct. But even with his telescope, he did not see a way of proving that the Earth moved around the sun.
For him, demonstration was the mark of science. For something to count as a scientific claim, it had to be demonstrated, it had to be conclusively shown to be the case. Anything short of that was called conjecture or opinion.
While he searched for a demonstration, a letter arrived from one of his followers, Benedetto Castelli, suggesting that the planet Venus could hold the key.
My dear Galileo, if Copernicus is correct, and Venus revolves around the sun rather than the Earth, it is clear that she would be seen not unlike the phases of the moon, sometimes as present and sometimes not. Pray tell me, if with your wonderful telescopes you have noticed such an appearance?
To the naked eye, Venus was just a point of light, but through his telescope, Galileo saw the planet as a disk. Over a period of months, Venus changed from a small disk to a larger crescent. Galileo immediately grasped that in a sun-centered system, this crescent would appear as Venus circled in an orbit between the sun and the Earth. Venus must be revolving around the sun rather than the Earth. Years later, Galileo finished his great book. It was called Dialogue on the Two Chief Systems of the World.
It is a debate about the world systems. Is the sun the center of the universe? Or is the Earth the center of the universe?
But I always think that his dialogue on the two great world systems was the persuasive book that made it intellectually respectable to believe in a moving world, a sun-centered universe. It was the book that won the war.
That gives you some sense for the significance of Galileo's thinking. It completely turned around the direction of the evolution of Western science, just at the level of astronomy. Okay. So, but we want to point out that Copernicus's theories were predated in some ways, to some extent, by Alberti, Middle Eastern scientists Alberti and Albertrucci, both addressing the issue of planetary motion. And particularly Albertrucci's references to the order of the planets of Mercury and Venus. We also, at this time, later Renaissance, the Harmony of the Worlds of 1619 by Johannes Kepler and the harmonic proportions of the construction of the cosmos. Along the same lines as Pythagoras indicated 1,500 years before. And as we said at the beginning, Johann von Goethe's comment, architecture is crystallized music. Here's an example of the dome of Florence Cathedral, and an example of a piece of music that was written exactly duplicating the construction of the cathedral, of the dome of the cathedral. The dome proportion is 6:4 to 2:3, and the music beat proportion in William Dufay's Nupe Rosum Flores, 6:4 to 3. In other words, the way the music is constructed, The way the music is constructed mirrors the same proportions in the architectural dome. And the day the dome was opened, Dufay performed the piece of music right under the dome, so the music would resonate in the dome. The same golden mean principles governing both of them. Here's an example of what the music sounded like that Dufay wrote. Streams of 6 and 4 moving along, and then at a certain point it shifts from 2 to 3, 2 beats in the top voice, 3 beats in the bottom voice. So the idea of the proportions of music reflected in the structure of architecture was very much on the minds of the Renaissance scholars. And this is both an audible and visual example of that. So when we use the phrase, music is audible culture, this is what we mean. We also want to mention one-point perspective in Renaissance art and the construction of paintings based on calculating the distance between the object and the canvas and then representing on the canvas exactly how those objects appear to the eye. And if you're standing at the front of the room, if you're standing at the back of the room, you're looking at me, it looks as though everything gets smaller as it moves toward me. Of course, it doesn't. Everything stays basically the same size. But to your eye, it looks that way. The Renaissance artists developed the concept of one-point perspective. But was it from the Renaissance? It actually came from a Middle Eastern mathematician named Al-Hazen. The proof of that is that Al-Hazen's manuscript is now sitting in the Vatican archive, annotated by Lorenzo Ghiberti. So the Italian Renaissance didn't invent one-point perspective. It came from Middle Eastern scholars and scientists, mathematicians. Caused a revolution in Western art, particularly in the Italian Renaissance. And here's an example of it. Pietro Perugino's handing of the keys. You can see if you can see the one point from which this painting expands. It's the door of the church, and these lines calculated to flow out to enable the artist to position the figures in the foreground at just the right size. The middle ground and the point for the one-point perspective in the door of the church. So these ideas became the driving force, mathematical ideas became the driving force in the concept of the artist and how to create visual art. The same with Raphael's School of Athens. The one point between the heads of Plato and Aristotle and the layers moving out to the front of the painting. In the Baroque period, Newton's Principia Mathematica of 1689, math, science, and industrial revolutions. The combination of mathematics and scientific methods drove the Industrial Revolution. The laws of motion were applied to mechanical devices, such as levers, pulleys, air and water pumps, weights, wedges, pendulums, engines, cannons. It drove the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain.
Sir Isaac Newton was a scientist who lived from 1642 to 1727. He developed the three basic laws of motion and published them in 1687 in a three-volume work called the Principia Mathematica. Newton's discoveries helped start a scientific revolution and led to the fundamental understanding of how bodies move through physical space. The first law of motion, the law of inertia. Objects will remain at rest or in a uniform motion in a straight line unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Here we have three spheres on the table in a state of rest. The gravity pulling the spheres down is countered by the force of the tabletop pushing the spheres up in the exact opposite direction. The balance of forces is what keeps the spheres at rest on the table. This sphere will act as an unbalanced external force. Without another force to counter its movement in the opposite direction, it becomes an unbalanced force acting on the other spheres. The external force collides with the spheres and changes their motion state. The natural tendency of an object to remain at rest or in a uniform motion in a straight line is called inertia.
In total, the laws of motion address the issues of inertia, motion, and reversal, inertia, dynamics, and the law of reaction. But the combination of these three laws became the driving force, as we said, behind an industrial revolution, when those were translated into the motion of mechanical devices. But were these original ideas? Well, originally, Avicenna, a Middle Eastern scholar from the Middle Ages, anticipated the concept of momentum in Galileo's theory of motion, as well as Newton's second law of motion, the Principia. So, again, the influence of Middle Eastern scholarship on Western science. How does this affect music? Well, when Newton's laws of motion enter the picture, as we said, we start to experience something called synchronicity. Once this idea surfaces in the cultural consciousness of the time, it starts appearing in art, music, literature, the concept of motion. Johann Sebastian Bach would be a good example of that, the math-driven scientific revolution in music, through his systematic and rationalized approach to the handling of his keyboard music. And here's an example of it. Scientifically controlled set of combinations of musical sounds moving in and out of different keys. Built on an instrument itself, which was the result of the Industrial Revolution. We would have had to have a keyboard sophisticated enough to play something like this. So the design of the musical instruments was also driven by a math-based scientific revolution. It's a very carefully controlled system of the laws of music, the laws of sound patterns. from the well-tempered clavier of 1723. But take a look at Baroque art. We've talked about this idea of synchronicity, that Newton's laws of motion began to vibrate in the social consciousness that appear in music and art. It's as though, in this particular example of Baroque art, it's as though someone, Rembrandt van Rijn's The Night Watch of 1642, compared this to the Renaissance piece we saw that was static and motionless. It's as though someone has reached into the painting and set the figures in motion. These are not static figures. These are figures that are walking diagonally across the plane of the painting. Look at the direction of the light. Motion, light, and color. Multiple color shadings of color. This is a different art form. It's being driven by a different level of perception based on a higher concept of scientific inquiry into natural law. We've gone up to the next level in our understanding of natural law. The sciences, the math-driven sciences now inform the visual arts. And as we said, the mathematically driven scientific revolution becomes the basis for a political revolution. Scientists were looking at natural laws. Political philosophers and scientists were looking at this and saying, you know, look at the way nature works. A tree doesn't nourish one half of itself and let the other half of it starve. There's equal distribution of goods and services so the whole tree can survive. This is an example of the way a society should be run, the way a government should be structured. So, from a math-driven, scientifically based industrial revolution, we get a political revolution because of the connection of natural law to natural rights. Natural rights. What are our natural rights? Well, if you read the American Constitution and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, what does it say? Every person has a basic, natural, God-given right to freedom, happiness, and the pursuit of our path in life. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are our God-given rights. This is where this came from. A political system, a government based on a math-based scientific revolution. And if we want to see the reflection of that in music, we need only look at the musical compositions of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Symphony number 41, the Jupiter Symphony. The entire symphony vibrates according to Pythagoras' golden mean principle. Did he do it on purpose? He just naturally did it. A lot of his works are like that. So when you hear Mozart, you're hearing the essence of Greek Pythagorean mathematics in the form of the golden mean principle. If you take the score and divide it by each movement by the golden mean principle, the golden mean of that section, and the golden mean of that section, perfect resonating golden mean structure like the Parthenon, like the divine proportions of the human form. And in fact, when you play Mozart for a group of students who are studying, measure their brain waves, the brain waves shift into alpha brainwave production because of the symmetry of electrochemical activity in the brain induced by the golden mean-based music relative to Pythagoras' original principle. Moving into the 20th century, the Industrial Revolution, the advance of societies, urbanization, industrialization, and the development of the industrial machine. Images and sounds of the Industrial Revolution in the 20th and 21st century. The acceleration in rationalism and empiricism in the 17th and 18th centuries to an automatized society, hopefully in service to humanity and the mastery of natural laws, increasing the likelihood that our societies will survive. But this brings us to the final segment of the presentation and the final look at the string theory of the Princeton string quartet theorists. And the answer to the question, what is the nature of the deep principle? After we get to the subatomic level of structure in the cosmos, we clear away the levels of the material world from the level of the elements, the molecules, atoms, subatomic structure, superstrings, what lies beyond? What is the essence of the cosmos? What is the nature of human consciousness? Well, we've already gotten some answer to that embedded in the theoretical constructions that have come down to us from the past. The Princeton String Quartet offers yet another one which reconciles quantum mechanics and Einstein's general theory of relativity. Inciting that the superstrings are the subtlest level of matter, the formative matter. Well, the terminology sounds similar to what we heard from Pythagoras. The idea that the essential nature of the cosmos is vibrating matter, and that the behavior, the proportions and the relationship between vibrating bodies of matter is the same as the proportions of vibration of the musical string. So the terminology sounds similar, but where does it lead us? Have we come full circle, face to face with the absolute? What is the nature of the absolute? Well, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, I'm prepared to offer something in the direction of an answer to that question, but you can come to the conclusions as you see fit. My question to you is, after I show you this computerized graphic that I've made, is this right? Given what we know, is this the deep structure principle that the superstring theorists have been looking for? At the top of the diagram, the tree of consciousness and the eternal cycling of consciousness flowing between divinity in this area and humanity at the top, the bodies, the senses of the intellect, the organs, the cells, subtler and subtler levels of natural law and construction of the human body and the cosmos. Moving toward this subtlest level, 10 to the negative 33rd centimeter, separating the world of change from the world of non-change. Subatomic level, past the subtlest level of the superstrings in this area, into the level of pure consciousness, what Vedanta describes as pure consciousness, the meeting ground of humanity and divinity, the cleaning out of the brain and the nervous system, going from the waking state to the dreaming state, the sleeping state, and the deeper states, the transcendental state, cosmic consciousness, Brahman consciousness, and then eventually 100% activation of the brain and the nervous system reveals the unity of human consciousness, the meaning of the term Vedanta, of this whole system as being one system, unified within the mind of God. And in fact, the deep principle that the superstring theorists search for is embedded within us as an extension of the divine proportion, the essential nature of humanity described by Pythagoras, hinted at by the superstring theorists of the 21st century. But the essence of it is quite simple. Simply dissolve this dividing line and create this whole system to be the meeting ground of humanity and divinity in unity consciousness. I think this was the level of consciousness that Mevlana described, that Shams Tabriz described, that all of the major and deepest thinkers of humanity, and eventually come to the conclusion that this was the essential nature, and perhaps the answer for the search for the deep principle of the superstring theorists in the 21st century. So what have we said? We've said that mathematics is the language of science, and that mathematically driven scientific inquiry has cleared away layer after layer of natural law to bring us face to face with the absolute, and in the process, causing Revolutions in art, revolutions in literature, revolutions in music, revolutions in politics. Revolutionary change. Every change in mathematics and science causes a ripple through the cultural consciousness to drive it forward to its next level of accomplishment, its next level of achievement. And that each aspect of the evolution of consciousness is one evolving wholeness, with one part affecting another. Within cultures, between cultures, all one evolving whole. Within the mind of God.